1 Samuel 16, 1 through 13. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king." But Samuel said, "How can I go? If Saul hears about it, he will kill me." The Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, 'I have come to sacrifice to the Lord.' Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. You are to anoint for me the one I indicate." Samuel did what the Lord said. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled when they met him. They asked, "Do you come in peace?" Samuel replied, "Yes, in peace. I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come to the sacrifice with me." Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, "The Lord has not chosen this one either." Jesse then had Shammah pass by, but Samuel said, "Nor has the Lord chosen this one." Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to him, "The Lord has not chosen these." So he asked Jesse, "Are these all the sons you have?" "There is still the youngest," Jesse answered. "He is tending the sheep," Samuel said. "Send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives." So he sent for him and had him brought in. He was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features. Then the Lord said, "Rise and anoint him. This is the one." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers, and from that day on the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. Samuel then went to Ramah. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Israel's inaugural king, Saul, does a pretty good job as a king in the beginning of his kingship. He even has the physical appearance. 1 Samuel chapter 9 verse 2 says that Saul is a handsome young man. There was not a man among the people of Israel more handsome than he. He stood head and shoulders above everyone else. Saul not only looks good, but he is also humble. When Samuel declares to him that God's hand is upon his life, Saul says, "I'm only a Benjaminite, from the least of the tribes of Israel, and my family is the humblest of all the families of the tribe of Benjamin." God doesn't choose a king from a popular tribe like Judah, but he chooses Saul, who is from the least of the tribes of Israel, Benjamin. After Saul becomes a king, he is very successful. He leads the Israelites in victory after victory against their rivals. Unfortunately, Saul's success doesn't last long. Saul eventually crumbles because of his lack of character and integrity. He makes some mistakes by being impatient and impulsive. Saul even disobeys God's commands, and he loses God's favor. We can find one good example of Saul's unreliable character in 1 Samuel chapter 15. God commands the Israelites to attack Amalek and destroy everything. But Saul doesn't follow God's words. When Samuel encounters Saul, Saul even lies to him. Well, there's another example in chapter 13. A king is not supposed to carry out the role of a priest, but Saul, out of fear, offers a burnt offering himself, even though it isn't his role. Then God delivers his message through Samuel. Here's God's message in 1 Samuel chapter 13, verse 13 to 14. You have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God. Now your kingdom will not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart. These verses tell us that God is looking for someone who seeks and discerns his will. For God, external image or outward appearance isn't important. That means God uses a person who humbly walks with him every day. Saul is a great king. He has every appearance of being kingly. He is tall, handsome. People like to follow him as a leader. He has all the traits. But Saul cannot handle success very well. In other words, Saul doesn't take care of his heart. His focus is on the outside, not the inside. One scholar points out that we can find a pattern of Saul's destructive behavior. He says it is a pattern of inner brokenness. This pattern of inner brokenness leads to outer rebellion. This scholar also lists the consequences of Saul's inner brokenness. First is contagious lack of courage. A spiritual leader inspires followers to have courage in their life. Saul can't do that because his heart is filled with fear. David is different. When he faces Goliath, he goes after Goliath with faith that God will lead him to victory. Then David inspires the armies of Israel to fight together. But there is no courage left in Saul's heart. Second is fearing what the people think, leading to acts of religious piety to impress people. From time to time, Saul disobeys God in trying to impress people around him. The Lord requires a sincere heart and a broken spirit, not success and religious piety. We don't need to impress people. Just be humble to God and be honest with God. We can show our brokenness to God. He will not judge us. God will pour His love and grace into our heart if we ask Him to heal us. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6 says, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that He may exalt you in due time." Now, if you noticed, we usually hear the word exalt when we worship God, when we honor God, we exalt God. But here in this verse, God says, God may exalt you in due time. That is exactly what David does. We know that David isn't perfect, but David humbles himself before the Lord. Every time David fails God, he doesn't run away from God. David runs toward God. He asks for forgiveness. David repents of his sin. We shouldn't run away from God when we find brokenness in our heart. Let's ask God to restore our heart. God will honor that. God will make our life glorious. God will bring victory in our life. Third is jealousy of others. Saul is jealous of David because of lack of inner courage and confidence in God. Saul wastes his time, energy, and resources to chase David. Last week, we learned a lesson about God's commandments, the 10 Commandments. The Exodus chapter 20, verse 17 says, "You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or male or female slave, or ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor." When our hearts are full of God's grace and love, we do not ask for more. We give thanks to God. We glorify God for His amazing grace. We give more to our neighbor. Fourth is disloyalty in relationship. Saul is a suspicious man and disloyal to his followers. He can't even trust his own son. Saul has the skills to be successful, but his character eventually reveals serious flaws. Saul drives people away, including a faithful servant like David. Even Samuel cannot continue his relationship with Saul. Eventually, Samuel too ends his relationship with Saul. Saul's flaws are deeper than we think. His unreliable character leads to the destruction of Israel and himself. And that is why God changes the direction and chooses a different king. In today's passage, the Lord is asking Samuel to stop grieving for Saul. Samuel needs to let go of the past to embrace change and a new future. God's plan is to start over. God commands Samuel to go to an unexpected place. This time, God wants to anoint an unlikely candidate as a king from Bethlehem. This may sound odd to ancient Middle East readers. Is there anyone worthy to be anointed as a king in Bethlehem? Bethlehem is a small and unimportant place. On the other hand, Jerusalem is a central place of the nation. There are many elites, religious leaders, and upper-class people in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a center of culture, business, and religion. This passage might have given hope to those ancient readers. If God wants, He can choose and anoint as a king someone from Bethlehem rather than Jerusalem. God can turn an ordinary person into an extraordinary person.